You know, when I first saw human-powered armor, I thought it was some kind of cosmic joke. 3 meters tall, 2 tons of metal, steam vents hissing like an angry tea kettle, and all to protect a being that weighs less than the suit's left boot. Yet this ridiculous contraption keeps winning battles against sleek, elegant alien tech. How does the galaxy's most expensive cosplay become a decisive advantage? Stick around because the answer will make you question everything you know about warfare. You know, most galactic species approach military technology with a certain elegant logic. They build armor that flows with the body, using smart materials that harden on impact and shifting plates that maintain perfect balance. The Zilani use organic alloys that repair themselves during combat, while the Vorax employ phase-shifting systems that redistribute mass instantaneously. Everything follows established principles of physics and efficient design. Minimal moving parts, predictable performance envelopes, and maintenance cycles that any technician can follow. Then you see human-powered armor for the first time, and it looks like a mechanical disaster someone forgot to scrap. The thing stands 3 meters tall with hydraulic pistons hissing steam, and metal plates rattling like loose change in a tin can. Instead of sleek integration, you see exposed wiring harnesses, redundant servo clusters, and cooling vents that blast heat in 3 different directions at once. It moves with the jerky uncertainty of a marionette operated by someone who just learned what strings do yesterday. The universal military standards everyone else follows emphasize weight-to-protection ratios and energy efficiency. Human armor appears to ignore these fundamentals entirely. It carries enough armor plating to stop artillery shells but wastes energy on pointless hydraulic theatrics. Where other species achieve protection through advanced materials science, humans seem to accomplish it by simply bolting on more metal until the problem goes away. The design philosophy appears to be, if something might break, add 3 backups and hope they don't all fail at once. Watching one of these suits operate is like observing a sentient scrapyard trying to dance. Joints whine under loads they clearly weren't meant to handle. Stabilizers overcorrect until the whole machine wobbles like a drunk giant, and the sound alone gives away its position from 3 clicks out. The thermal signature looks like a small industrial accident, and the power consumption could run a small settlement. Nothing about it suggests military efficiency. It's the universe's most expensive and dangerous cosplay project. Yet these walking contradictions keep showing up on battlefields across the spiral arm. And that's where the real mystery begins. The physical reality of operating 2 tons of unreliable machinery should make it impossible to fight effectively, yet somehow humans make it work. Look, the math alone should make this thing impossible to operate. A 70-kilogram human trying to control 2,000 kilograms of machinery breaks every established principle of exoskeleton dynamics. The physics suggests that every step should result in catastrophic failure. The momentum shifts alone would tear servos from their mountings and send the whole contraption tumbling forward like a falling tree. Known biomechanical limits indicate that no organic nervous system should process the feedback required to maintain balance in such an unbalanced system. The weight distribution alone presents a nightmare scenario. The center of gravity sits so high that simple arm movements create dangerous pendulum effects. When the suit turns, the angular momentum wants to keep rotating long after the operator intends to stop. Standard stabilization algorithms used by other species would constantly fight against these forces with precise micro-adjustments, but human armor seems to embrace the wobble rather than correct it. The operator becomes like a tiny pilot trying to steer a mechanical giant that's constantly trying to fall over. Human biomechanics research shows their nervous systems operate with built-in latency that should make real-time control impossible. The delay between neural impulse and muscle response, combined with the mechanical lag of hydraulic systems, should create feedback loops that amplify small errors into catastrophic failures. Yet somehow humans manage these systems through what appears to be anticipatory movement. They don't react to the machine's position so much as predict where it's going to be. Watching an operator inside one of these suits is like seeing someone try to ride a bucking bronco while solving complex physics equations in their head. Their limbs move through control gestures that don't precisely align with the machine's response, creating this strange dance where human and armor never quite sync up perfectly. The interface uses neural links that should create sensory overload, feeding torque readings, hydraulic pressures, and joint angles directly into the operator's consciousness. Most species would require extensive cybernetic augmentation just to process the data stream without having a seizure. Somehow this 70-kilogram biological processor manages 2 tons of barely controlled chaos through what seems like controlled stumbling. They don't fight the machine's tendencies so much as incorporate them into their movement patterns. The operator doesn't perfectly control the armor so much as negotiate with it, finding ways to make the machine's natural instability work in their favor. They turn physics problems into tactical advantages, which makes you wonder what kind of design philosophy could possibly justify building something that requires such constant improvisation just to function. Here's the thing about human engineering. They never met a problem they couldn't overcomplicate. Where other species design combat technology with elegant simplicity, humans approach it like someone trying to solve a math problem by adding more variables until it somehow works. The galactic standard for military hardware emphasizes minimal complexity, fewer moving parts, cleaner energy pathways, and interfaces that don't require advanced degrees to operate. Everyone else builds systems that work predictably under established physical laws. The contrast becomes painfully obvious when you compare human armor to anything else in service. The Zilani use organic polymer systems that flow like liquid armor when not engaged, forming seamless protective shells that move with natural grace. Vorax phase shift technology redistributes impact energy across the entire surface area, turning kinetic strikes into harmless ripples. These systems follow logical design principles. Why have 30 servo motors when one smart material can accomplish the same thing more reliably? Military engineering research consistently shows that complexity increases failure rates exponentially. Every additional circuit, hydraulic line, or redundant system creates new potential points of failure. Standard doctrine emphasizes that combat equipment should be as simple as possible, while meeting operational requirements. Human engineers appear to operate on the opposite principle. They meet requirements by making everything more complicated than strictly necessary. It's like building a mansion when a shed would suffice, then filling the extra rooms with explosives and hoping nothing goes wrong. This approach seems rooted in human cultural development patterns. Their technological history shows a persistent tendency toward layered solutions rather than elegant ones. When faced with a limitation, they rarely redesign the system. They add another component to work around the problem. This creates technological archaeology where new systems must accommodate decades of previous compromises and additions. The armor becomes a museum of past engineering decisions, each layer addressing some specific concern without ever simplifying the whole. The apparent irrationality of this approach becomes particularly confusing in combat technology. Why choose complexity when simplicity offers better reliability? Why build systems that require constant maintenance and specialized knowledge when other options exist? The answer seems to lie in how humans view failure, not as something to eliminate but as something to manage. Their complexity creates multiple pathways to functionality, even if no single pathway works perfectly. This design philosophy means that when something inevitably goes wrong, and with this much complexity, something always goes wrong, the system doesn't simply stop working. It fails in interesting ways that sometimes create unexpected advantages. The very overcomplication that makes human armor seem ridiculous becomes its strange strength, turning potential disasters into tactical opportunities that nobody could have planned for deliberately. Watching these complex systems fail provides the real education in how human technology actually works. Watching a human armor demonstration is like watching a comedy of errors with explosives. The military attaches set up observation decks with perfect sightlines to the demonstration field, briefing observers on expected performance metrics and tactical capabilities. They distribute data slates, showing optimal movement patterns and weapon discharge rates. Everyone expects to see precisely choreographed maneuvers that demonstrate technological superiority through flawless execution. The atmosphere feels like attending a theater performance where everyone knows their lines and movements in advance. Then the demonstration begins and reality immediately diverges from the briefing materials. The first suit lurches forward with a hydraulic whine that suggests internal components fighting for dominance. Instead of smooth transitions between firing positions, you see jerky movements where the armor overshoots its target and has to correct itself with visible struggle. One arm might seize up entirely, forcing the operator to complete the drill one-handed while diagnostics flash error codes across the helmet display. The thermal signature blooms erratically as cooling systems battle overheating components. Specific failure modes become almost predictable in their variety. Stuck arms lock at awkward angles, requiring the operator to physically shake the limb or tap it against available surfaces. Overcorrections send the suit stumbling forward when a precise sidestep was intended, creating this lumbering dance of almost falls. Weapon systems misfire at inopportune moments, with targeting computers apparently arguing with stabilizer systems about where to actually aim. The sound alone tells the story: grinding metal, hissing pneumatics, and the occasional concerning bang from deep within the machinery. Complex system analysis shows that failure rates increase exponentially with environmental stressors. Normal combat conditions involving dust, moisture, and electromagnetic interference should render these systems completely inoperable, based on component reliability data. Yet during demonstrations, operators work through failures with what appears to be practiced familiarity. They don't seem surprised when systems malfunction. They treat it as part of the normal operating procedure rather than an emergency situation. The demonstration becomes a mechanical ballet where every dancer has a different choreographer. One suit might complete a perfect firing sequence while its neighbor struggles to stand upright after a simple turn. Operators develop their own troubleshooting techniques mid-maneuver, kicking jammed components or performing what looks like percussive maintenance on uncooperative systems. Their reactions range from calm professionalism to what sounds like creative vocabulary exercises transmitted over open channels. Understanding how anyone considers this effective requires seeing beyond the apparent chaos. The operators aren't fighting against failure. They're working with it, incorporating malfunctions into their tactical decisions. A stuck arm becomes an unexpected shield. A misfired weapon creates diversionary explosions, and overheating systems might deliberately cook off surrounding vegetation for concealment. What looks like catastrophic failure becomes integrated into the combat methodology. Watching systems fail completely during demonstrations reveals the hidden strength of this approach. When primary systems go offline, secondary systems activate with different characteristics that change how the armor moves and fights. The operator adapts to these new parameters without apparent hesitation, as if they've trained for this exact combination of failures. Complete system collapse doesn't stop the fight. It just changes the rules of engagement. The real question becomes how anything continues functioning when so many components fail simultaneously. Which brings us to the backup systems that supposedly prevent total failure. Look, human engineers don't believe in single points of failure. They believe in failure everywhere at once. Standard military redundancy involves backup systems that activate when primary systems fail, creating clean transitions that maintain operational capability. The Galactic approach focuses on preventing failure entirely through superior design and materials. Everyone else builds systems where backups remain dormant until needed, then take over seamlessly without affecting performance characteristics. Human redundancy operates on completely different principles. Their backup systems don't wait for failure. They run concurrently with primary systems, constantly checking and cross-verifying each other's functionality. When something fails, 3 different systems might try to compensate simultaneously, creating this cascading effect where backups activate other backups. It's not a clean handoff so much as a chaotic negotiation between multiple systems that all think they should be in charge. You see this play out in specific failure scenarios. A hydraulic failure might trigger the pneumatic backup, which then overheats and activates the mechanical override system, which subsequently strains the power distribution network and causes secondary electrical systems to engage. Each backup system comes with its own peculiarities and performance characteristics, meaning the armor doesn't just keep working. It transforms into something different with each layer of redundancy that engages. The operator doesn't get the same machine back after a failure. They get a new configuration with different capabilities and limitations. Reliability. Engineering principles suggest this approach should decrease overall system trustworthiness. More components mean more potential failure points, and complex interactions between systems create unpredictable emergent behaviors. Standard doctrine emphasizes that backups should simplify rather than complicate recovery scenarios. Human engineering embraces the complication, treating system transformation as a feature rather than a bug. The armor becomes this living entity that evolves during combat, adapting its capabilities through successive failures. The software managing these systems represents its own special kind of madness. Instead of clean decision trees, you get neural networks that make contextual judgments about which failures to prioritize. The systems don't just detect problems. They evaluate tactical situations and sometimes choose which components to sacrifice for strategic advantage. The software might deliberately overload one system to create a diversion, or intentionally damage non-critical components to preserve energy for weapons. It's not just about maintaining function, it's about managing degradation toward useful outcomes. This approach creates a Russian nesting doll of malfunctions where each layer reveals new capabilities underneath. What looks like catastrophic failure from the outside might actually represent the system entering a different operational mode optimized for current conditions. The armor doesn't break down so much as reconfigure itself through controlled collapse. Operators train not for specific failure scenarios, but for the principles of adaptation itself. The counterintuitive result is that this mess actually increases practical reliability. While individual components fail constantly, the system as a whole rarely becomes completely inoperable. There's always another backup, always another workaround, always some partial function that can be leveraged. The machine might not do what it was designed to do, but it will usually do something useful. Complete system failure requires the simultaneous collapse of multiple redundant pathways, which becomes statistically unlikely despite the apparent fragility of individual components. Human military engineering treats reliability as an emergent property of complex interactions rather than a characteristic of individual components. They don't build systems that are hard to break. They build systems that are hard to break completely. This creates equipment that maintains some level of functionality under conditions that would render other species' technology completely inert. The real surprise comes when you realize that damage doesn't just create new limitations, it sometimes creates unexpected advantages that wouldn't exist in a perfectly functioning system. Here's the counterintuitive part. The more this armor breaks, the more dangerous it becomes. Standard military doctrine across the galaxy treats equipment damage as a linear reduction in combat effectiveness. Damaged systems should operate at reduced capacity, with clear performance degradation that follows predictable patterns. Tactical simulations account for equipment damage by applying straightforward penalties to movement, protection, and firepower. Everyone understands that a damaged fighting vehicle becomes less effective than an intact one. The mathematics of combat efficiency reflect this basic reality. Human armor operates on completely different principles. Observers consistently report that damaged suits don't simply become weaker versions of themselves, they transform into something else entirely. A suit with compromised hydraulics might develop unexpected mobility advantages, using residual pressure for sudden jerking movements that evade targeting systems. Damaged sensor arrays force operators to rely on manual targeting, which somehow results in more creative shot placement. Even external damage to armor plating can create deflection angles that ricochet incoming fire in useful directions. Psychological warfare research shows that unpredictability creates disproportionate combat advantages. Opponents facing damaged human armor must constantly reassess threat capabilities instead of relying on established tactical databases. The apparent malfunctioning creates uncertainty that slows decision cycles and causes hesitation at critical moments. What looks like mechanical failure might be a tactical feint, and what appears to be a lucky shot might be deliberate exploitation of damaged systems. The enemy spends more time analyzing what's happening than responding effectively. Damaged human armor behaves like a wounded animal that becomes more aggressive and unpredictable. Limping movement patterns make targeting solutions more difficult to calculate. Erratic weapon discharge creates suppression effects through sheer unpredictability rather than volume of fire. The operator works with the damage rather than against it, finding ways to make each malfunction serve some tactical purpose. A stuck leg joint becomes a pivoting point for unusual firing angles, while overheating systems might be deliberately vented toward enemy positions. Enemy reactions to apparently malfunctioning equipment follow predictable confusion patterns. First comes overconfidence, the assumption that damaged armor presents an easy target. Then comes frustration as expected. Vulnerabilities fail to materialize. Finally comes hesitation as operators realize they're not fighting damaged equipment, so much as different equipment with unknown capabilities. The psychological impact outweighs the actual physical damage, creating tactical advantages that don't appear on any damage assessment spreadsheet. The tactical value of appearing broken becomes a weapon in itself. Human operators learn to exaggerate apparent damage to lure opponents into overcommitting. What looks like a crippled suit might be perfectly capable of sudden violent action. The armor doesn't just fight with its systems, it fights with the perception of its capabilities. Enemy forces must treat every malfunction as potentially deliberate, which slows their engagement tempo and creates openings. Human armor becomes more dangerous when damaged because it transforms predictability into uncertainty. The enemy can't apply standard damage assessment protocols or predict performance degradation curves. Each damaged system creates new combat parameters that only the operator understands completely. This turns apparent weakness into tactical advantage through the simple mechanism of being harder to read and counter. The destruction of expected functionality creates space for unexpected capabilities to emerge. This damage paradox creates situations where opponents face difficult choices about engagement priority. A perfectly functional suit follows predictable patterns that can be countered with established tactics. A damaged suit becomes an unknown variable that might do anything from collapsing entirely to unleashing unexpected offensive capabilities. The very brokenness that should make it vulnerable instead makes it threatening in ways that are hard to prepare for. The advantage lies not in being stronger, but in being less predictable. Damaged human armor fights using tactics that nobody trained against because they emerge from specific failure conditions. This creates a combat environment where the opponent's understanding of military technology becomes a liability rather than an asset. Their doctrine prepares them for reduced capabilities, not transformed capabilities, which brings us to the enemy's fundamental dilemma when facing equipment that seems to operate outside established combat paradigms. Fighting human armor is like trying to predict the weather on a gas giant. Utterly pointless. Standard military doctrine against armored units follows established patterns of engagement. You identify the enemy's capabilities, predict their movement corridors, establish kill zones, and apply overwhelming force at calculated intervals. The mathematics of armored warfare work because technology behaves predictably. A damaged vehicle slows down, a compromised system fails completely, and tactical responses follow logical progressions that can be anticipated and countered. These tactics collapse completely against human armor because the technology doesn't behave according to established patterns. What should be a crippling mobility hit might result in the suit developing unexpected maneuver advantages through uncontrolled hydraulic releases. Damage that should disable weapon systems sometimes creates new firing patterns that are actually more effective than the original configuration. The enemy finds themselves facing not reduced capabilities, but transformed capabilities that operate outside their tactical databases. Military predictability research shows that effective warfare relies on anticipating opponent behavior within known parameters. Human armor introduces so many variables that prediction becomes mathematically impossible. Commanders watching engagements report suits that should be combat ineffective, continuing to fight using methods that defy standard damage assessment protocols. A leg actuator failure doesn't mean the suit falls over. It means the operator finds a way to use the damaged limb as a pivot point for unusual attack angles. The experience becomes like playing a game where the rules change constantly. Just when you think you understand how damaged human armor operates, it reveals new capabilities that shouldn't exist. That suit dragging its left side might suddenly use the damaged armor plating to ricochet fire into unexpected angles. The one with overheating weapons might deliberately cook off ammunition to create area denial effects. The enemy spends more time analyzing what's happening than actually fighting back. Command confusion becomes a weapon in itself. Officers watching from tactical displays see damage indicators that suggest easy targets, but the reality on the ground proves completely different. Units report enemy armor operating at 20% efficiency, yet somehow achieving 200% effectiveness through methods that make no tactical sense. The disconnect between expected performance and actual performance creates decision paralysis at command levels. The strategic advantage lies in this unpredictability. While other species' damaged equipment becomes less dangerous, human damaged equipment becomes differently dangerous. The enemy can't apply standard force concentration formulas because they don't know what capabilities they're actually facing. That suit trailing hydraulic fluid might be moments from collapse, or it might be using the fluid slick to create tactical advantages. There's no way to know until you engage, and by then it's usually too late. The tactical payoff comes from equipment that appears to fight its own operator while actually creating combat advantages. What looks like mechanical failure becomes tactical innovation. The enemy faces not just human soldiers, but the chaotic emergent behavior of human-machine systems that operate outside established combat paradigms. This forces opponents to fight cautiously against apparently damaged equipment, creating hesitation that human operators exploit ruthlessly. Real battlefield examples demonstrate how this dilemma plays out in actual combat situations, turning apparent technological disadvantages into decisive victories. Look, the Battle of New Shanghai should have been a textbook defeat for humanity, until it wasn't. The tactical situation presented overwhelming odds that should have settled the engagement in minutes rather than hours. On one side stood 6 human-powered armor units of questionable operational status, carrying maintenance logs that read like repair manuals for catastrophic failure. Arrayed against them sat a full Zalani armored company with integrated air support and artillery coordination. Standard force multiplication calculations showed advantage ratios that military academies use as examples of certain victory. Everything from sensor coverage to ammunition reserves favored the larger force by margins that eliminated reasonable doubt about the outcome. Conventional military analysis predicted rapid encirclement and destruction. The human units occupied indefensible positions with limited mobility options and apparent system degradation. Thermal scans showed erratic power distribution and weapon systems operating outside normal parameters. The Zalani commanders expected to methodically dismantle resistance using established combined arms tactics, pin with infantry, flank with armor, and eliminate with precision fire. The battle plan followed doctrine that had proven effective across dozens of conflicts against various species. All indicators suggested a straightforward engagement ending in complete victory. The initial moments played out according to expectations. Human armor units exhibited exactly the kinds of failures their maintenance records suggested. One suit's primary weapon system jammed after 3 rounds, requiring manual clearing procedures that left it vulnerable. Another developed stability issues that made coordinated movement difficult. Thermal blooms indicated cooling system failures that should have degraded combat effectiveness. The Zalani forces began their advance with confidence, applying pressure exactly where tactical models indicated weakness. Force multiplication principles suggest that technological superiority and numerical advantage create compounding effects. Better sensors should locate enemies faster, greater firepower should destroy them more completely, and numerical superiority should overwhelm response capabilities. The mathematics of combat efficiency show clear thresholds where resistance becomes theoretically impossible. Human armor at New Shanghai operated far below these thresholds by every measurable standard. The units should have been overwhelmed through simple application of superior resources. The battle quickly transformed from chess match to something resembling a game where pieces move according to dice rolls. Human units didn't respond to Zalani maneuvers with logical counters. They created chaotic responses that made no tactical sense. A suit with damaged leg actuators might suddenly collapse forward into a roll that coincidentally avoided incoming fire. Weapons malfunctions created random firing patterns that happened to suppress advancing infantry. Systems that should have failed completely instead failed in useful ways that disrupted Zalani coordination. Zalani commanders faced mounting confusion as their tactical assessments constantly proved wrong. Units reported enemy armor operating with impossible mobility despite visible damage. Fire patterns emerged that shouldn't have been possible with malfunctioning targeting systems. The human units fought like damaged equipment that had gained sentience and developed creative survival strategies. Command decisions based on standard damage. Assessment protocols resulted in disastrous miscalculations as the reality of combat constantly diverged from expectations. The engagement demonstrated how 6 malfunctioning suits could defeat a vastly superior force through the strategic advantage of unpredictability. Damaged systems created emergent capabilities that standard tactical analysis couldn't anticipate. The Zalani fought against equipment that transformed its weaknesses into strengths through constant adaptation. What looked like technological inferiority became tactical superiority when combined with human improvisation and acceptance of system failure. This victory demonstrated principles that would reshape galactic warfare doctrine, forcing military planners to reconsider fundamental assumptions about technology and combat effectiveness. Here's what really bothers. The other species, they can't categorize human tactics as either strategy or insanity. Galactic military doctrine operates on classification systems that neatly sort combat methodologies into predictable categories. You have offensive patterns, defensive postures, reconnaissance protocols, and combined arms integration. Everything fits into established frameworks that allow for analysis, prediction, and counter-development. Military academies teach these classification systems as fundamental knowledge, creating generations of commanders who understand warfare as a quantifiable science with rules and patterns that can be mastered through study and application. The inability to analyze human armored tactics creates genuine cognitive dissonance among alien strategists. Standard analytical tools return contradictory data that suggest both extreme incompetence and brilliant innovation simultaneously. Damage assessment algorithms indicate systems should be non-functional, yet combat effectiveness metrics show unprecedented success rates. Movement patterns appear random but somehow achieve tactical objectives. The data refuses to conform to established models, leaving analysis teams with results that make no logical sense according to their training and experience. Alien attempts to develop countermeasures follow predictable failure patterns. The Zelani created specialized EMP systems designed to exploit human armor's electrical complexity, only to discover the systems failed in ways that created new offensive capabilities. The Vorax developed targeting algorithms specifically for erratic human movement patterns, but the algorithms couldn't account for the sheer variety of possible failure modes. Each attempted countermeasure addressed specific observed behaviors while missing the fundamental reality that human tactics weren't following behaviors at all. They were emerging from system interactions. Military doctrine development relies on identifying patterns and creating responses to those patterns. Human combat methods don't establish patterns so much as demonstrate anti-patterns that defy categorization. The tactics resemble a language that can't be translated because the grammar changes with every engagement. What works as a countermeasure in one battle becomes completely ineffective in the next, not because humans adapted, but because the underlying conditions that created their tactics were different from the start post-battle analysis sessions among alien commanders reveal growing frustration with the entire analytical process. Intelligence officers present findings that contradict each other within the same report. One section might detail technological inferiority, while another describes tactical superiority. Assessment teams struggle to create after-action reviews that make logical sense according to standard military science. The very tools they use to understand warfare become obstacles to comprehension when applied to human methods. The fundamental problem lies in trying to predict something that isn't predictable by nature. Human tactics emerge from complex system interactions between operators and malfunctioning equipment. They're not planned so much as discovered through engagement with failing technology. This creates combat methods that are inherently situational and impossible to replicate deliberately. The aliens are trying to analyze chaos as if it were strategy, which is like trying to forecast weather by studying individual raindrops. Alien military commanders cannot predict or counter human armored tactics because they're fighting against emergent properties rather than deliberate designs. The tactics aren't conceived in war rooms but born from the interaction between human adaptability and technological failure. This makes them fundamentally unpredictable, using standard military analysis, which assumes rational actors working with functional equipment toward planned objectives. Human success comes from embracing unpredictability rather than eliminating it. This analytical failure leads other species to attempt the obvious solution. If you can't beat the technology, perhaps you can replicate it. The impulse to copy apparent success drives several major research initiatives across multiple species, despite the fundamental misunderstandings about what actually creates human combat effectiveness. Several species tried to copy human armor and failed spectacularly every time. The attempts followed predictable patterns of technology reverse engineering. Research teams acquired damaged human suits through battlefield recovery or diplomatic channels, then subjected them to exhaustive analysis. Engineering divisions documented every component, mapped all systems, and created perfect replicas using superior materials and manufacturing techniques. The copies looked identical on technical schematics, often improving upon perceived design flaws while maintaining the overall structure. Everything suggested these replicas should outperform the original human designs. The failures manifested in almost poetic variety. Solani engineers created versions with flawless hydraulic systems that never leaked, only to discover the perfect seals eliminated the tactical steam emissions humans used for concealment. 4X replicas featured advanced neural interfaces that provided seamless control, but this eliminated the slight control lag that humans used for predictive movement. Each attempt to fix the human design removed some essential element of its chaotic functionality. The copies worked too well to be effective in combat. Technology transfer research shows that successful replication requires understanding cultural context alongside technical specifications. Human armor evolved from their particular relationship with machinery, a culture that treats imperfect technology as a challenge rather than a defect. Other species approach engineering with perfection as the goal, which fundamentally misunderstands the human design philosophy. Their copies became what humans would call sterile versions, technically superior but tactically inert. Watching alien versions operate compared to human originals reveals the missing elements. The replicas move with precise, predictable motions that make targeting easy. Their systems fail cleanly and completely rather than failing in interesting ways. Operators treat malfunctions as problems to be solved, rather than opportunities to be exploited. The entire combat approach remains trapped in conventional thinking, despite the unconventional equipment. It's like copying a masterpiece painting stroke for stroke without understanding art. You get the image but lose the meaning. The missing elements become apparent in comparative testing. Human operators can make damaged armor effective through improvisation and adaptation. Alien operators expect their replicated armor to work as designed and become frustrated when it doesn't. The cultural expectation of reliability creates psychological barriers to exploiting failure. Teams that train on perfect systems cannot suddenly embrace imperfection when needed. The replication attempts focus on the machine while missing the human element that makes it work. These failures demonstrate that human armor effectiveness comes from the interaction between purposely imperfect design and culturally conditioned adaptation. Other species cannot replicate this because they approach technology from opposite philosophical foundations. Their engineering excellence becomes a liability when trying to copy something that derives strength from its flaws. The very desire to improve upon the design ensures the copy will lack the essential qualities that make the original. Effective attempts to copy human armor design fail because other species cannot replicate the cultural context that makes it work. They build machines expecting reliability and predictability, while humans build machines expecting failure and adaptation. This fundamental philosophical difference means the copies might look identical on technical drawings, but they lack the soul of chaotic functionality that makes human armor so effective in practice, which suggests humans didn't accidentally stumble into this approach. They weaponized chaos deliberately as part of a broader military philosophy. Look, humans didn't accidentally stumble into this. They weaponized chaos deliberately. Conventional military doctrine emphasizes order, predictability, and controlled engagement parameters. Everyone else treats chaos as something to eliminate through better planning and technology. Standard galactic warfare operates on principles of synchronized movement, established communication protocols, and damage control procedures that restore order quickly. The entire military science establishment focuses on reducing variables and increasing control. Human military philosophy embraces the opposite approach. They don't see chaos as a problem to solve but as a resource to harness. Their doctrine incorporates chaos theory applications that treat unpredictable outcomes as tactical features rather than bugs. Instead of fighting against the natural tendency of complex systems to behave erratically, they build strategies that exploit this tendency. The armor's design reflects this philosophical foundation. It doesn't resist failure so much as channel it toward useful outcomes. Complex systems research shows that emergence creates capabilities that cannot be predicted from individual components. Human military engineers design for emergence rather than fighting against it. They create systems with sufficient complexity that interesting behaviors emerge during operation, then train operators to recognize and exploit these emergent properties. The armor becomes a platform for discovering new combat capabilities rather than simply executing pre-programmed functions. This turns apparent design flaws into strategic advantages. Their approach resembles harnessing a storm as a weapon. You don't control the storm. You learn to ride its energy toward your objectives. The armor's constant malfunctions create this storm of unpredictable effects that operators learn to navigate. Deliberate design choices ensure the chaos remains within bounds that humans can manage while opponents cannot. Systems fail in ways that create tactical openings rather than simply ceasing function. The machine becomes less predictable, but more effectively dangerous. Observations of human design processes reveal conscious decisions to incorporate chaotic elements. Engineers build in mechanical slack that creates unpredictable movement patterns. Control systems include intentional latency that forces operators to anticipate rather than react. Redundant systems don't simply back up primary functions. They create alternative operational modes with different characteristics. Each design choice increases variability while maintaining basic functionality thresholds. This transforms chaos from accidental incompetence into actual military strategy. The apparent technological shortcomings become deliberate features that create combat advantages through unpredictability. Human success doesn't come despite the chaos. It comes because of the chaos. Opponents face systems that cannot be analyzed using standard military science because they operate on principles that embrace rather than suppress complexity. The weaponization of chaos creates reliable advantages because it leverages fundamental properties of complex systems. While other species try to make warfare more predictable, humans make it less predictable for everyone except themselves. Their operators develop intuitive understanding of how chaotic systems behave, giving them insight that opponents cannot gain through analysis alone. This turns what appears to be technological backwardness into sophisticated warfare that conventional military thinking cannot effectively counter. The strategy works because humans don't fight chaos, they partner with it. They've learned to make unpredictability their ally rather than their enemy. This requires soldiers trained not for perfect system operation, but for effective chaos management, which explains their unique approach to military preparation. Here's how humans prepare their soldiers. They train them to succeed when everything fails. Galactic military training follows standardized protocols that emphasize precision and reliability. Soldiers learn to operate equipment under optimal conditions, with gradual introduction of failure scenarios as advanced training. The approach focuses on building confidence through mastery of systems that perform as designed. Everyone else creates soldiers who expect their technology to work properly and become frustrated when it doesn't. Human training philosophy embraces the opposite approach. Their basic training incorporates constant equipment failures from the very beginning. Recruits learn on gear that's been deliberately sabotaged or worn beyond reasonable service life. The training doesn't prepare them for perfect operation. It prepares them for constant adaptation to malfunctioning systems. They become experts in making broken equipment work through improvisation rather than proper maintenance. Adaptive learning research shows that failure-based training creates more flexible problem-solving capabilities. Humans structure exercises where success requires working around multiple simultaneous system failures. Trainees might face weapons that jam randomly, communication systems that drop signals, and mobility systems that operate at reduced capacity. The training emphasizes finding solutions rather than fixing problems, creating soldiers who view malfunction as the normal state of affairs. Their approach resembles learning to swim by being thrown in deep water. Instead of gradual acclimation, humans use immersion in failure scenarios from the beginning. Trainees develop intuitive understanding of how systems fail and what opportunities those failures create. They learn to read the signs of impending malfunction and develop contingency plans before problems actually occur. This creates operators who anticipate rather than react to equipment issues. Selection criteria for armor operators focus on psychological adaptability rather than technical proficiency. Humans don't choose the best technicians. They choose individuals who demonstrate creativity under pressure and comfort with uncertainty. The ideal candidate isn't someone who can maintain perfect systems, but someone who can exploit broken ones. They look for people who see limitations as puzzles rather than obstacles. This training produces soldiers who approach combat with completely different expectations. While other species operators become distressed when equipment fails, human operators treat malfunction as part of the combat environment. They've already experienced every possible failure mode during training and developed personal techniques for each scenario. The chaos of battle becomes familiar territory rather than unexpected disruption. The training philosophy teaches soldiers to succeed specifically when their equipment fails. They learn that perfect function is the exception rather than the rule. This creates combat effectiveness that actually increases as systems degrade, because operators have more experience with failure than with optimal operation. The soldiers become most comfortable when things are going wrong, which is exactly when other forces become least effective. This approach develops a particular psychological relationship with technology that explains much of human combat effectiveness. The soldiers develop what might be called the confidence of incompetence, not in themselves but in their equipment. They stop expecting reliability and start expecting interesting failure modes that can be weaponized. Human soldiers develop a strange confidence in their own apparent incompetence. The psychological impact of operating constantly failing equipment creates a peculiar mindset that turns conventional thinking upside down. Where other species soldiers become anxious when technology malfunctions, human operators display increasing calm as systems degrade. They stop worrying about whether equipment will work and start focusing on how it will fail next. This transforms uncertainty from a source of stress into a tactical tool. The paradox lies in how effectiveness actually increases through acceptance of failure. Soldiers operating damaged armor report feeling more engaged with the combat environment rather than less. Their attention shifts from operating perfect systems to reading emergent opportunities from malfunctioning ones. The mental energy that others waste on frustration becomes available for creative problem-solving. They develop what might be called productive resignation, the understanding that things will go wrong, and that's when the real work begins. Combat psychology research shows that stress adaptation follows unexpected patterns with human operators. Instead of experiencing performance degradation under pressure, they often demonstrate improved reaction times and creative thinking when systems fail. The constant malfunctions create a state of heightened awareness where operators remain engaged with multiple potential failure scenarios simultaneously. They stop seeing broken equipment as a problem and start viewing it as a different kind of tool with unique capabilities. Human attitudes toward malfunctioning armor range from affectionate frustration to dark humor. Operators develop personal relationships with their specific suit's peculiar failure modes, giving them nicknames and learning each machine's individual personality. Some suits might consistently overheat on the left side. Others develop specific hydraulic leaks that create useful steam screens. The soldiers learn these patterns and incorporate them into tactical planning rather than trying to eliminate them. This mindset resembles a gambler who thrives on uncertainty rather than fearing it. The operator doesn't know which systems will work or how they'll fail, but they develop confidence in their ability to exploit whatever happens. Each engagement becomes a series of improvisations based on current conditions rather than execution of predetermined plans. The uncertainty stops being a threat and becomes the game itself. Observations show this confidence transfers directly to combat situations. Human operators engage enemies with equipment that should make retreat the only logical option. They advance when others would fall back, attack when others would defend, and create opportunities from what should be certain defeat. The psychological advantage comes from expecting chaos rather than being surprised by it. Opponents face soldiers who become more determined as their situation worsens. Confusion works as a weapon because it creates asymmetric psychological states. The human operator understands the chaos while the enemy fears it. What looks like incompetence becomes tactical advantage when the soldier knows how to use the confusion effectively. Both sides face the same chaotic conditions, but only one has trained to thrive in them. This turns apparent technological disadvantage into psychological superiority. The ultimate realization is that human armor effectiveness comes from this psychological transformation, rather than the technology itself. The machine creates the conditions for chaos, but the human mindset turns that chaos into victory. The armor doesn't make the soldier effective. It makes the environment chaotic enough for the soldier's particular skills to become decisive. This explains why the galaxy's dumbest armor keeps winning battles against technologically superior opponents. Look, the dumbest armor in the galaxy became the most feared through pure paradox. The evolution of galactic perception followed a predictable pattern of disbelief, turning into reluctant respect, and finally settling into genuine apprehension. Initially, military analysts treated human-powered armor as a technological curiosity, something to study for amusement rather than serious consideration. The prevailing attitude suggested humanity simply hadn't mastered proper military engineering yet, and would eventually adopt more sensible designs. The laughter came easily when watching early demonstrations, where suits stumbled through basic maneuvers, while hissing steam and shedding components. Technology. Perception research shows that military reputation builds through demonstrated reliability and predictable performance. Human armor initially scored poorly on both measures, with failure rates that should have condemned it to museum displays rather than battlefield deployment. The shift began when battle reports started showing unexpected victories despite apparent technological inferiority. The laughter quieted when analysts realized the suits kept winning engagements they should have lost. Respect grew reluctantly as the pattern repeated across multiple conflict zones against different opponents. The transformation resembles a joke that gradually becomes a threat. What started as amusement at human technological clumsiness turned into concern about unpredictable combat effectiveness. Military planners who once dismissed the armor as primitive began worrying about how to counter something that didn't follow established combat paradigms. The fear emerged when attempts to develop countermeasures consistently failed, suggesting this wasn't just unusual technology but something fundamentally different from anything else in galactic service. Strategic impact assessments show that unpredictable weapons create disproportionate psychological effects. The mere presence of human armor on a battlefield forces opponents to reconsider standard engagement protocols. Commanders must allocate additional resources for contingency planning against capabilities that might or might not exist. The uncertainty becomes a force multiplier that operates independently of actual combat performance. What began as technological mockery became strategic concern that reshaped military planning across multiple species. Observations of changing attitudes reveal deep unease about human technological development patterns. If they could make this ridiculous armor effective, what else might they weaponize successfully? The fear extends beyond the armor itself to the underlying philosophy that created it. Other species worry that human approaches to technology might make conventional military science obsolete. The perception shift reflects broader concerns about humanity's place in galactic power structures and their unusual problem-solving methods. The mini payoff arrives when you realize the galaxy's supposedly dumbest armor became its most feared battlefield technology precisely because it defies conventional analysis. The fear comes not from overwhelming power but from unpredictable effectiveness. Opponents don't know how to fight something that wins through apparent malfunction and controlled chaos. The technological shortcomings that invited initial ridicule became strategic advantages that created genuine military concern across the spiral arm. This transformation points toward underlying principles that make the approach work, not just the technology itself, but the entire philosophy behind its development and deployment. The real lesson isn't about armor design, but about rethinking fundamental assumptions of what makes military technology effective. Human success suggests that sometimes embracing imperfection creates advantages that perfection cannot achieve, which brings us to the doctrine that makes this possible. Not traditional military tactics, but something fundamentally different that operates on principles of managed chaos, rather than controlled order. Here's the final military insight. Human doctrine isn't about tactics. It's about managed chaos. Standard galactic military doctrine builds on centuries of tactical evolution, where formations, maneuvers, and engagement protocols follow predictable patterns. Everyone operates within frameworks that allow for precise planning and counter-planning. The foundations rest on clear hierarchies, established communication protocols, and damage control procedures that restore order quickly. Military science treats warfare as a complex but ultimately solvable equation, where better planning and technology create advantages. The human approach represents something fundamentally different that doesn't fit traditional tactical categories. They don't employ tactics so much as orchestrate chaos toward desired outcomes. Their combat behavior defies standard analysis because it emerges from system interactions rather than deliberate planning. You see human units performing maneuvers that make no tactical sense according to established doctrine, advancing when they should retreat, concentrating force where they should disperse, and abandoning strong positions for apparently weaker ones. The patterns refuse to conform to any known tactical framework. Emergent behavior research shows that complex systems develop capabilities that cannot be predicted from individual components. Human combat operates on these principles rather than traditional tactical thinking. Their effectiveness comes from spontaneous adaptations to changing conditions rather than execution of predetermined plans. The units behave like complex adaptive systems where local interactions create global patterns that cannot be centrally controlled or easily analyzed. This turns what looks like tactical incoherence into strategic advantage. The approach resembles a fluid that adapts to any container it encounters. Human combat units don't follow set patterns so much as flow around obstacles and through openings in ways that defy prediction. They exploit opportunities that cannot be anticipated through standard tactical analysis, because those opportunities emerge during combat rather than existing before it begins. The fighting becomes less about executing plans and more about discovering new possibilities through engagement. Observations confirm the impossibility of countering something that isn't predictable. Traditional military counters rely on anticipating opponent behavior and preparing responses. Human methods cannot be anticipated because they're not predetermined. They emerge from the interaction between operators, equipment, and combat conditions. Opponents find themselves trying to counter tactics that don't exist until the moment they're employed, creating this frustrating game where every countermeasure addresses yesterday's tactics rather than today's reality. The effectiveness comes from embracing complexity rather than reducing it. Human doctrine accepts that warfare involves too many variables for perfect prediction or control. Instead of fighting this reality, they weaponize it by creating systems that thrive on uncertainty. Their approach works because it aligns with the fundamental nature of combat as a complex, unpredictable environment rather than trying to force combat into artificial predictability. The mini payoff reveals that human military doctrine based on organized confusion becomes nearly impossible to defeat because it cannot be effectively analyzed or anticipated. Opponents face not a set of tactics but a system that generates new approaches constantly. The doctrine doesn't provide answers so much as create conditions where effective solutions emerge spontaneously during combat. This turns warfare from a game of chess into something more like trying to predict weather patterns. Possible in general, but impossible in specific detail. The real secret lies not in the doctrine itself, but in how human operators complete these chaotic systems through their unique training and mindset. The secret isn't in the armor. It's in the human operating it. Standard military systems treat operators as components within larger mechanical frameworks. The relationship follows clear hierarchies where human inputs feed into predetermined response patterns. Soldiers learn to work with equipment that behaves predictably, creating this clean separation between operator decisions and machine responses. The system works because both parts follow established protocols that ensure seamless integration between biological and mechanical elements. The human approach completely inverts this relationship. Their operators don't work with the armor so much as become part of it. The machine's constant malfunctions require such continuous adaptation that the human completes the system rather than merely operating it. Where other species build armor that functions independently, humans build armor that only functions through constant human intervention. The operator becomes the stability in an unstable system, the predictability in unpredictable machinery. You see this in countless examples of improvisation during combat. An operator might use a malfunctioning hydraulic system to create unpredictable movement patterns that evade targeting. Another might deliberately overheat weapons to create thermal blooms that confuse enemy sensors. The humans don't fix problems so much as incorporate them into their combat methodology. Each failure becomes an opportunity for creative adaptation that transforms limitations into advantages. Human-machine symbiosis research shows this represents a fundamentally different approach to combat systems. Other species aim for perfect integration, where human and machine function as a single coordinated unit. Humans achieve effectiveness through constant negotiation between operator intentions and machine capabilities. The system works not because it functions perfectly, but because the human learns to work with its imperfections. This creates a partnership where both elements adapt to each other continuously. The operator functions like a musician who can make any instrument work through skill and adaptation. A master violinist can produce beautiful music from a poorly maintained instrument by compensating for its weaknesses and exploiting its peculiar strengths. Human armor operators develop similar relationships with their machines. They learn each suit's individual quirks and develop techniques that turn apparent flaws into useful characteristics. The machine doesn't need to be perfect because the operator makes it effective regardless. Selection and training processes focus specifically on this adaptability. Humans don't choose the best technicians. They choose individuals who demonstrate creativity under pressure and comfort with uncertainty. The training emphasizes adaptation over mastery, teaching operators to succeed with malfunctioning equipment rather than perfectly functioning systems. This produces soldiers who view technological failure as normal operating conditions rather than emergency situations. The complete picture of human armored effectiveness emerges from this symbiotic relationship. The armor creates chaos while the operator channels that chaos toward tactical objectives. Neither element alone would be particularly effective. The machine is too unreliable, the human too vulnerable. Together, they create a combat system that operates outside predictable parameters while maintaining strategic effectiveness. The weaknesses of each component become strengths when combined properly. Human operators complete the chaotic system by providing the adaptability that the machinery lacks. They turn random failures into deliberate tactics through constant improvisation and creative problem-solving. The armor doesn't work despite its flaws. It works because its flaws create opportunities that perfect equipment cannot provide. The operator's role becomes not to prevent failure, but to direct it toward useful outcomes. Which brings us to understanding how this approach reflects broader human problem-solving methods across technological domains. Look, this isn't just about armor. It's about how humans approach all complex problems. Their engineering philosophy follows consistent patterns across every technological domain, from spacecraft design to medical systems to urban infrastructure. You see the same principles of redundancy, adaptability, and managed chaos applied to challenges that other species solve with elegant simplicity. The armor represents just one manifestation of a broader cultural tendency to embrace complexity rather than eliminate it. The implications extend far beyond military technology into strategic thinking and problem-solving methodologies. Human approaches to climate management, economic systems, and even social organization show similar patterns of building complex, redundant systems that thrive on adaptation rather than perfection. Their cities develop organic transport networks with multiple overlapping routes rather than efficient single solutions. Their medical systems employ treatment protocols that adapt to individual variations rather than following standardized procedures. Everything reflects this preference for customized complexity over universal simplicity. Human engineering in other fields demonstrates remarkably consistent patterns. Their spacecraft feature multiple independent life support systems where others use integrated single solutions. Power grids incorporate redundant pathways that create apparently inefficient networks, but maintain functionality during disasters. Even their software development follows principles of constant iteration and failure management, rather than seeking perfect initial solutions. The approach consistently favors resilience through complexity over efficiency through simplicity. Research into technological development patterns shows humans consistently choose evolutionary rather than revolutionary improvement. They rarely redesign systems from first principles, instead adding layers of complexity to existing frameworks. This creates technological ecosystems where new solutions must accommodate decades of previous compromises and adaptations. The result is magnificent. Inefficiency that somehow achieves remarkable reliability through sheer multiplicity of approaches. Their method resembles building redundant bridges everywhere instead of one perfect bridge. If one pathway fails, 3 others might still function. If conditions change, some combination of options will probably work. The approach seems wasteful until you realize it creates systems that survive conditions that would destroy more elegant solutions. Humans build for uncertainty by creating multiple answers to every question. Cultural observations reveal roots in human historical development patterns. Their technological evolution occurred through rapid adaptation rather than planned progression. Solutions emerged from practical problem-solving rather than theoretical perfection. This created an engineering culture that values what works over what looks elegant, and reliability over efficiency. The philosophy reflects deep cultural comfort with imperfection, and trust in adaptive capability. The broader implications suggest human Technological advantage comes from this comfort with complexity and uncertainty. While other species seek to eliminate variables, humans learn to manage them. Their systems might not perform optimally under ideal conditions, but they continue functioning under conditions that would paralyze more advanced technology. This creates practical advantages that theoretical superiority cannot match. The mini payoff reveals that human design philosophy transforms apparent weaknesses into strategic strengths across multiple domains. Their technological approach creates systems that are hard to break completely because they're already somewhat broken to begin with. The chaos becomes manageable through practice and adaptation rather than elimination through perfect design, which suggests the future of technology. And warfare might belong to those who can harness complexity, rather than those who can create perfection. Human methods could redefine what constitutes advanced technology across the galactic community, forcing reconsideration of fundamental engineering principles that have stood for millennia. The implications extend far beyond military applications into how all complex systems might be designed and operated. Here's what keeps alien strategists awake at night. Humans are just getting started. Galactic warfare doctrine currently operates within carefully defined parameters, where technological advancement means cleaner energy weapons, smarter targeting systems, and more efficient propulsion. Everyone anticipates developments along predictable trajectories: faster ships, harder armor, better sensors. The entire military-industrial complex across multiple species focuses on incremental improvements to existing paradigms, refining what already works, rather than reinventing fundamental approaches. The future looks like more of the same, just slightly better in measurable ways. The disruptive impact of human approaches is forcing re-evaluation of these basic assumptions. Their methods don't represent another step in military evolution, so much as a completely different evolutionary path. While others work on making weapons more precise, humans work on making them more adaptable. Where competitors develop systems that fail gracefully, humans develop systems that fail interestingly. This divergence suggests future conflicts might not be decided by technological superiority, but by methodological difference. You see this disruption in current doctrinal changes across multiple militaries. Training programs now incorporate more failure scenarios and adaptation exercises. Equipment design specifications increasingly include requirements for graceful degradation, rather than just optimal performance. Strategic planning accounts for unpredictable enemy behavior, rather than assuming rational opponents. These changes represent direct responses to human methods that existing doctrine couldn't effectively counter. Military innovation research shows adaptation cycles accelerating in response to human combat methods. The traditional decades-long development cycles are compressing into years as militaries struggle to keep pace with approaches that defy standard analysis. The pressure isn't to develop better technology, but to develop different thinking about technology itself. This represents a fundamental shift in how military advancement gets measured and pursued. The impact resembles introducing calculus to civilizations that only know arithmetic. The mathematics of warfare suddenly operate on completely different principles that make previous methods seem limited and primitive. Human approaches don't just offer new tools. They offer new ways of thinking about problems that transform what's considered possible. This creates strategic advantages that cannot be overcome through incremental improvement of existing methods. Long-term strategic implications suggest humanity's influence will reshape galactic conflict for generations. Their methods favor adaptability over power, creativity over precision, and resilience over efficiency. Future warfare might involve less about overwhelming force and more about creating unpredictable complexity. The advantage could shift to those who best manage chaos rather than those who best eliminate it. This technological evolution is heading towards systems that embrace, rather than resist, complexity. Future human-influenced warfare might feature equipment designed specifically to fail in useful ways. Soldiers might train primarily for adaptation rather than execution. Command structures could emphasize emergent tactics over predetermined plans. The entire framework of military science might need re-examination from first principles. The mini payoff reveals that the future of warfare in a human-influenced galaxy belongs to those who can harness unpredictability, rather than those who can create perfect systems. Effectiveness might come from managing complexity rather than simplifying it. The greatest military advantage could be the ability to operate successfully when things go wrong rather than preventing things from going wrong. Humanity's greatest impact might not be their technology, but their demonstration that completely different approaches can succeed where conventional methods fail. This suggests the galaxy's military future will be less about technological arms races and more about philosophical differences in how to approach conflict itself. The real competition won't be over who has the best equipment, but who has the most effective relationship with imperfection. Which brings us to the final assessment of what human chaos engineering really means for the future of galactic civilization. The galaxy may never understand human-powered armor, but they've learned to respect it and fear what happens when humans apply this same chaotic logic to other technologies. Perhaps effectiveness isn't about perfection, but about embracing imperfection so completely that it becomes your greatest weapon.